Okay, this is 3C, the exercise prescription basics. So we'll do a lot more with exercise prescription as we move on. Some of the basic principles of the exercise program design. So some basic concepts: specificity, that if you do a bicep curl, it's going to work your biceps. Things like that. Uh, your targeting and the training that you do is specific, and the response is specific to what you're doing. I think it's pretty obvious. Overload and progression. This is where people get tripped up. So overload, increased workload to make gains, but the overload is doing more than what you're accustomed to, but it's for that workout. So if I work out today and I do more than I'm accustomed to, that's an overload. As opposed to progression is kind of like overload over time. So if I'm looking at my progress over a week, over a month, over 6 weeks, whatever, that's my progression. So as opposed to overload. So be careful when you're looking at test questions and those concepts. People get mixed up on those. The initial values, where are you starting from? If you're an obese individual that's been sedentary and you start an aerobic exercise program, then your aerobic improvements from a percentage perspective are going to be much greater than than somebody that's already at the elite level of fitness. If you're an elite fit individual, your aerobic fitness may improve, but as a percentage wise, it's not going to improve that much. So kind of where is that starting point? How much improvement are you going to see? Individuality, it's kind of your talent level. So some people are just better at certain things. So I think it's interesting when you look at elite athletes. Elite athletes, they may be good at a similar sport or a similar activity. There's a little bit of you could go from one sport to another kind of from that perspective, but you will never see a strongman participate in a Ironman triathlon and win. So and vice versa. So you have that individuality. What is that talent? What is that gene pool that you were born with that makes you better at one thing or another? I always think it's kind of interesting. They have the CrossFit Games. They say the fittest person on earth, but if that person decided to do a triathlon or a marathon, they might do well, but they're not going to win. So, what do we consider being the fittest? I mean, it's just you're the best at this type of exercise and exercise program. So it's kind of, when people say that, it's kind of irritating. And it's kind of interesting that, you can't be good at everything. But the individuality is kind of what is that talent that you're born with? What's the genetic makeup that's going to make you better or worse at a certain activity? Diminishing returns. Once you get closer to the goals, there's less change. It's the plateau. So you work hard, you're working harder and harder, but you're not really seeing that much results. That's the diminishing return. And reversibility. If you stop exercising, guess what? It goes away. So use it or lose it. The elements of the exercise prescription. So we've got the FIT principle, frequency, intensity, time or duration, type or mode. All of that goes together to kind of produce volume. So if you're looking at volume, it's really putting the frequency, intensity, time kind of together. And then you have the type, which is the mode of activity, and then the progression. Typically, the first thing they want you to increase is the time. And it really kind of depends on where you're at and what your issues are. But generally, in the exercise prescription literature, and for the general population, they want the time to be increased first. The art and science of exercise prescription. So, you have to be creative, flexible. You have to work with the individual, and that's really the art of exercise science. So, we have these recommendations. They're based in science. They're based in research. They've been tested. We know things that are to be true based on the evidence that we have. But how do you get that to work for a person's time schedule, a person's preferences, likes, dislikes, their money situation, all these different types of things? That's the art of exercise science. And we'll deal with that quite a bit. The science aspect, as I said, is based in research. as well as some people look at the science perspective, being that it's based on anatomy and physiology, and that's appropriate too, to think of that exercise physiology as that being the science aspect as well. So some questions that food for thought, and we'll have some discussion situations, and that'll be different. But so what are some instances where you give the complete opposite recommendation to two people? One instance would be food consumption. You have an individual that's obese. Their goal is to lose weight. They already have plenty of weight, plenty of stored energy. They probably not only need to exercise, but they need to decrease their caloric consumption. Whereas if you have somebody that's a high-end athlete, they may need to eat more. So you're telling one person to eat less, the other person to eat more. That gets confusing, and the public will take bits and pieces of that. I remember when the Fitbits, the activity trackers, came out, and one person, and I don't know if they sued or not, but they were like, oh, I gained weight with my activity tracker, because the activity tracker was telling them theoretically by a calculation, a prediction equation, how many calories they expended. So that individual thought, well, I can eat that many more calories, and then they start to exceed the amount of calories that they expended. So you kind of have to make sure that people understand it. The population and the public will often follow their own agenda with some of this information. But then again, that's where the art and the science comes into play, is understanding an individual situation and how do we make the information that we know apply to that person. So stages of progression. They have the initial conditioning, the improvement, and the maintenance stage. The initial conditioning is kind of the familiarization, getting the basics down. And these things will vary from person to person. Your textbook does give some time values. The ACSM book also gives you some time values. I'm hesitant to give time values because for you guys, the initial conditioning is probably very, very short. You'll probably already jump into the improvement stage. You know how to exercise. Maybe you took some time off. Maybe you're getting ready for a sport. But you're not really doing the initial conditioning. You're doing things to improve your function. It's like you're skipping the initial conditioning and jumping into the improvement stage. Whereas if you have somebody that's been sedentary, older individual, there might be a much bigger familiarization aspect to it, and the initial conditioning will be significantly greater. So it kind of depends on the individual and where they're at. The improvement stage, I'll say in most instances, the improvement stage is, I'd say, 6 to 12 weeks. So if you start an exercise program, or if an adult starts an exercise program that's already moderately fit, is not dealing with any weight issues, they will see most of the improvements within about a 6 to 12 week period. Where that changes is if the person has a lot of weight loss. If they're losing weight, they're going to continue to see improvement as long as they're losing weight. And that weight loss could be a fairly lengthy period of time. So again, the book and the ACSM, they give you values, but it really kind of depends on the individual's situation as to say, okay, how long is this improvement stage going to be? I would add, with the improvement stage, one of the things you guys deal with is that you've just finished growing. So as you're growing and maturing, you will continue to see improvements. So I know throughout college, probably it was my sophomore or junior year when I really saw a plateau. Until then, I saw some steady, not huge, but some steady improvements, because I wasn't finished. I may have been finished growing, but I wasn't finished maturing. And who knows if I ever psychologically, mentally am fully mature. But anyway, from a physical perspective, I wasn't fully mature. Even though you stop growing, you're still maturing to a certain perspective. So that maturation, as long as you're maturing, physically maturing, and I remember it was between my sophomore and junior year of college, that summer, where I put a fair amount of weight on, I'd say 5 to 10 pounds over that summer, and I was stronger and bigger when I got back, not enormous by any stretch, but I noticed a significant difference, and I see that sometimes in the college male population. that they put on a significant amount of muscle. They come in a little scrawny, and then they kind of fill out. As long as you have that, you're going to be improving. But that's going to be over fairly soon. It's probably already over for all of you. So the improvement stage, as long as that's happening, you'll see it. But once that stops, you'll see more of a plateau. Then the maintenance stage, you're just trying to keep what you got. So often the good news is to maintain, depending on your level of fitness, to maintain elite levels of fitness, that takes a lot of time, effort, and work. But to maintain basic levels of fitness is not that difficult. It doesn't take that much work. So for me, I'm just trying to hold on to what I got. I'm not doing a ridiculously large amount of activity. I'm active, but I'm not doing that hardcore level of activity that I did in college, that I did in graduate school. Those days are over to a certain extent, but I'm still able to maintain a fair amount of my physique as well as the muscle mass that I have.